Thank you very much. I'm Melissa Highton. I'm from the University of Oxford. The title of the talk is Opening Up Oxford Like Never Before. I'm head of the Learning Technologies group at Oxford, and my colleague Pete Robinson is here with me as well. And the Learning Technologies group is central IT at Oxford, so we provide all of the infrastructure, all of the services to the institution. And we've taken on an institutional position, I think, on OER recently, and it's called OpenSpires, the project, and so we have leaflets about this, and obviously that's building on the dreaming spires of Oxford and opening it up. So I'll tell you a bit about that project and what we've been doing. We'll see how far we get. So the thing about opening up Oxford is that I think that Oxford is perceived as a very closed institution. It's an elite institution. It's hard to get in, and only a small number of people get to go to Oxford and study there. And it's also a very complex institution, and it has a long history. And there's a physical environment that is very strong. People recognize these buildings. They recognize the look. And that characterizes a lot of what goes on in the institution. It's an institution very shaped by the physical, and so trying to apply a virtual environment on top of that, or IT on top of that, is interesting as an academic exercise, as an institutional exercise, also as a sort of physical exercise, in that we have to dig up roads and we have to put wireless connections through buildings with very thick walls, and the colleges own the streets. So there's a very strong physical environment, very strong feeling of place around what we do. So when we took on an open educational project, we're trying to think about how that fits with what the business of the institution is. We didn't get any large philanthropic funding for this. We didn't get Mellon or Hewitt. It's largely run from within the institution. So in terms of sustainability, we have to think about from the beginning how we would take this on as a service. This is a service from the centre to the institution. And also thinking about the time, Oxford time, keeping things in perpetuity and deciding what to keep at Oxford is very much part of the discussion. The Bodleian is a legal deposit library, and we have been holding material for 900 years. So when people talk about 15 years, 20 years, perpetuity at Oxford really does mean something quite long. And the first keynote at this conference, when she was talking about making decisions about what to hold and how long it was, and also the fact that the original copyright was to send a copy of the book to 9 universities. Well, Oxford was one of them, and we've still got them. And we get 1,000 new items every day. So although we don't have to pay for those, somebody has to process them, and there's 10 staff just work in the library and dealing with those new items every day. So in terms of sustainability and dealing with large amounts of content, you would think that Oxford would know kind of what we're doing. So we were trying to think about how we could fit OER onto that. And it's about, I think, matching the right technology to the institution and figuring out how it can fit with our strategic mission so that it's sustainable, so that it becomes part of accepted practice, so that it will just continue and carry on. So I've been thinking about sort of sustainability, and I'm going to concentrate on sort of the 4 E's of sustainability, which are economic, environmental, equity, and emotional. And obviously the economic, lots of people have mentioned the economic arguments for OER, so I'm not going to rehearse those again. Environmental is very much, for me, about the institution and the environment in which we run services and the academics that we work with. Equity, obviously, about how we make material available in an equal way and to whom. And emotional is about making sure that people want to do it so that it will continue. It's also true that OER content is maybe kind of new at Oxford, but the commitment to open source and open data is already quite strong. We have an open source virtual learning environment. We're part of the Sakai Foundation. We're part of the OpenCast project, which is institutional podcasting at many different institutions. So the idea of open source, open access publishing, open content is not so strange to us as you might think. But we are a very traditional university. It's a very famous university, and there's benefits to that. And I don't actually think that Oxford is a particularly risk-averse institution. It is actually quite an innovative institution, but it means that when we make decisions about high-profile activities, we have to be aware that there will be press coverage, there will be criticism of it, and we need to link those things to our strategy so that we can defend it, so that we can be sure that this is something we're actually committed to, and so we need to make sure that these things are closely aligned to institutional strategy and mission. And obviously on Friday we launched, this is the copy of Shakespeare, we've launched the first folio, Shakespeare First Folio as Creative Commons in iTunes just this Friday, and we've had publicity about that this week. And this is actually the next step in our OpenSpires project, so it continues on. The commitment from the university is to regularly publish high-quality open educational content that is owned and generated by Oxford University academics. And some of it is sort of born digital stuff, some of it is very old, paper-based. Obviously, the first folio is very old. We're lucky to still have it because actually we had a copy of the first folio when it was first published, and then when the third edition came out, we threw away the first copy because we didn't think it would be relevant anymore. And then it took about 500 years to get that back. But you know, don't throw away the stuff just because there's a newer version. So what we're trying to do is to Oxford University is a generator of content because our academics are in the business of publishing. So there's a lot of new content all the time coming through. And what we've been doing with the OER project is basically to establish processes within the institution that would allow us to publish that content in a way that could be available for reuse. And the time that we've spent, because obviously the content is a steady flow because the academics are doing that research all the time. The difficulty has mostly been around legal, and just we've spent some money with the university legal services to just make sure that there's a license that people are happy to sign off, and we've gone with Creative Commons. We talked a lot with academic colleagues about their comfort level around a sort of continuum of openness and what they're happy to have happen to their material. And I think that issue about emotion is very important for making informed consent, informed decisions at source. So we get the material from the academics and get their sign-off at that point. So we're not reverse engineering old material. We're starting with material that's produced now. And we've been able to support the academics in making those decisions to the extent that we have about 170 academic colleagues who are regularly releasing material, Creative Commons licenses. And it's mostly podcasts, it's audio recordings of lectures and research talks. What I think is interesting at Oxford is that the academics are media literate enough to understand that iTunes and podcasts is a medium that fits with what they want to do, because these are academics who are working at a top university on a global stage anyway, and they have interest in impact and outreach and getting their dissemination, getting their information out there. And so basically we're offering a platform for that, and in return we're asking them to release it as Creative Commons. So it seems to fit with what it is they want to do. There's some nice Oxford content on your iPhone. So OpenSpires, and you can Google for this and find it if you want. So Oxford has a very strong brand, and it has a very distinctive character, and the material that we've released sort of echoes the academic life of the institution. And we're calling it OpenSpires, but Oxford actually has been part of the a sort of open education movement for quite a long time. I think people forget that actually Oxford was one of the first big players in the university extension movement in the late 19th century. So this is actually, we call this opening up Oxford like never before, but the technology has allowed us to get this content out to a much, much wider audience, but it's always been something that has been part of what we wanted to do. And Oxford does have one of the largest continuing education departments in the UK, and we have thousands of students who study via continuing education and online courses with Oxford. So the release of OER content, it's not unusual for Oxford to be producing online content. So thinking about the economic model, it's very much about impact and reputation. And obviously our reputation is kind of exclusivity. So the material that we produce, we concentrate on the unique, and having material that can't be found elsewhere. And we hope that that's a contribution that we're making into the sort of body of knowledge that is being published. So the core business at Oxford, obviously, is we do research, and we're interested in making that knowledge available on a global scale. We want to attract and include the best students and staff in our organisation. We want to ensure that we meet student expectations. And the student expectations are very much about open access and open browsing. At Oxford, any student can attend any lecture. So they pretty much tailor, in conjunction with their tutor, a pathway through materials rather than there being prescribed materials for a particular course. So their experience of being able to find material and use it is very much part of what they expect. So the recording and capture of a lot of material and putting that into the Sakai environment where they can browse around that themselves, having a body of recordings of stuff that's going on in the university kind of fits with what the students would be expecting. And the lecturers don't seem to have any problem with the idea of letting lots of different people. They're not so interested in restricting access. They're much more interested in making it open. And of course, the academics are content creators. They have new knowledge, and they are interested in making sure that the material is not locked in silos, and they want it to be available. They also know that a recording of a lecture is not the same as an Oxford education, and the purpose of an Oxford lecture is to send you to the library to do further research. So the library and Oxford University Press, which are also big parts of our organisation, are not under threat by this activity, which I think is seen very much as a complementary part of what it means to study and learn in an Oxford style. And I think there's also something very important about the experience of students who come to Oxford and what they go on to do in their lives. So many of them do go on to be sort of leaders and decision makers. And we do have these quite famous multidisciplinary courses such as PPE, Philosophy, Politics and Economics, which most of the UK cabinet appear to have done. But also that idea that so there is that kind of interdisciplinary approach, but also that I want students who are at Oxford to know that not all software or not all content comes from proprietary suppliers, that there is an environment in which they will work and go on to. I think that almost there's a graduate skill in knowing that there are different licenses and different ways that material and software and different tools that are available. So I want them to study in that environment as well as go on to work in that environment. There's something about to crash on my head. Anyway, so thinking about the environment in which they publish, and the difference between academic staff and students, and people have been talking about whether we get students involved or staff involved. At Oxford, it's sometimes hard to tell the difference because there's a lot of the postgraduate researchers are very much seen as junior members of the academic community, and they will be in research teams with academics. And a lot of the students are publishing as academic authors while they're with us, sometimes as first or second named author on papers. So we're talking about material that is not primarily designed as a teaching resource, but is very much about getting new knowledge out there and worldwide. So we launched in 2008 podcasts from Oxford in iTunes, and OpenSpires is building on that, and it really is, it's very much part of our podcasting service. We have a channel in iTunes U, and a larger and larger proportion of that now is badged with Creative Commons. We get a lot of downloads, 5 million in the first 2 years. And there's a steady flow of material going up, because every evening in Oxford there are recordings, every evening in Oxford there are research seminars going on across the campus, and Pete's team run out on bicycles with recording equipment and capture an awful lot of those, and we have a steady flow of material coming through, because it's very much what we're capturing is very much part of what is being produced brand new in the institution every evening. Some of our most popular stuff is interviews with Oxonians. It's conversations, the kind of conversations that the academics are having over dinner and over lunch and in the studies in their colleges. We get two academics talking to each other about their work, and you can kind of imagine that this harks back to the Tolkien and C.S. Lewis drinking in The Bird and Baby and thinking about what they're going to write and how their work influenced each other. And so the sense of place and what Oxford is about is very much what we're capturing, and that's about the context. So I think that when you're looking at sustainability, you have to pay attention to scale, you have to pay attention to diversity, and allow both large and small. And what we're doing is providing a service by which providers all around the institution can feed material into the centre, and we can put it up into iTunes U for them. I think that responding to the shape of the physical environment and the way that the university is organised is key to the success, and thinking about what it is that we do and the intellectual property statutes that go with the ownership of material and what the academics want to do with the material means that we are actually fitting very much to the things that they are choosing to do, which makes me think that it's more likely to be sustainable. So there's that kind of emotional hearts and minds around the process, which, and our initial pump priming money, which was pretty small, we had about 150,000 from JISC, which is a funding body in the UK, has now finished. But the project continues and grows and gets stronger and stronger. And you, as I say, on Friday we started with EPUB books to go with that. And we are increasingly seeing material with Creative Commons license coming out of Oxford, going up into these channels. It's all available in iTunes U. It's also all available outside iTunes U, in case anybody was concerned about that. And thinking about how you go from those kind of patterns of activity into the details of how you do this, how you share and value resources, how it fits with what the academics are doing anyway, is very much part of what will make it sustainable and what will make it have the impact that fits with their career aims and their ethos of academic practice, which has brought them to Oxford to start with. So that's our OpenSpires project, and there's a little bit more about it if anybody's interested. Any questions?
Any question?
I'm just wondering what Creative Commons license you're using, because one of your slides says that the content cannot be reused for educational purposes, if I read it correctly. The green slide.
All materials on your video materials, non-commercial, like attribution, same as the MIT license. We run a series of focus groups in the early days with sets of academics to discuss all these issues about ownership and stuff. And that was the license they were with. We're doing a few other projects where we've dropped the non-commercial. For the usual reasons.
Yeah, just one of your slides led me to believe that it couldn't be reused. That's why I thought this is excellent work. Why would you not?
No,
No, it's
absolutely be clear. Every single thing is there to be used, downloaded, used in education. It's got a clear Creative Commons license, a legal form that every single academic has signed, and I have a filing cabinet of hundreds of pieces of paper. So it's absolutely Creative Commons.
Do you guys have a lot sort of different variants of those licenses for specific faculty members, or they either take the one you have or they don't publish?
Well,
we do have some flexibility.
we do have flexibility in the framework, but we are trying to run a sustainable service, and we found the knowledge of copyright in academia to be very, very weak, and we decided to simplify it down to just have one license, just because it makes it more efficient and stops confusing things, which, I think this conversation has shown it. Instantly there's a confusion of copyright. I mean, I see this day in, day out, so we're just trying to go for a very simple one license.
There is quite a range of knowledge of copyright, particularly if people have already been involved with publishers for publication of books. A lot of Oxford academics often do deals with the BBC. They're often in conversations about copyright and IPR generally, and that's, as I say, most of the effort for this project has actually been around coming up with a license that they could easily tick, choose and sign so as to allow us to scale. It would be fine if we only had 5 people and we could sit with them for a very long time talking about their individual positions, but we've had to kind of sort of set on one channel, one license.
So follow-up to that, what do you do when people have third-party materials in their presentation?
Again, just follow the same kind of methodology. We've decided that we can stick with kind of born digital, clear material that's easy for us to get through the system. So we're not taking the MIT approach of trying to keep lawyers in jobs. We're just keeping to a very pure cyber in, it's out. And make things clear. We don't have any money. As Melissa said, we won't sell with large grants to clear.
So if a speaker shows up for one of your evening seminars, and you have already sent a team to record, and the third slide is copyrighted material, it's not theirs, you just pack it up and you don't use the recording?
Often we're not recording video. Often we are mostly recording audio, so we wouldn't necessarily capture the slides.
Okay.
We also ask for academic sign-off at head of department level, so central computing is not making these decisions for so the guest speakers are researchers in their field, and that is, we are to a certain extent trusting. When Pete's team look at video material, if they can spot the material that seems to belong to somebody else, but actually the events that we're recording are actually usually in rooms a lot less sophisticated than this. It really is someone standing in a seminar room, possibly sitting on a sofa. There may be slippers, possibly dogs, and a lot of dust. And it really is, you run up, you put a little lapel mic on them, run the cable, you stand back, and they talk for an hour about their newest and most interesting, and it's their thoughts, and part of their academic ethos is that this is their stuff, and that's very much how the academics identify, and that's what we're capturing. So.
Question. Have you run into problems with faculty who have subsequently all published their work that they've discussed and you put up on iTunes, and now the ownership of that work belongs to the publisher?
No, because they're not. The Creative Commons allows them to retain the authorship, and if they go into a book deal or something, it will be based on material. If it's their own research, they're probably publishing a number of journal articles. They're probably publishing books talking on the BBC about it as well. So this is just one of the places in which they may have talked about it. And many of them do have book deals, ideally with Oxford University Press. And also, some of the podcasts drive business through Oxford University Press. Obviously, we have click-throughs, and some of the academics have become much higher profile and got book deals out of the fact that they are now famous by the fact that they were the first people to volunteer up to do podcasts. So there's a growing group of people who are becoming famous for that reason, and that's driving business to them, and it's all part of academic reputation. And so we haven't... there have been some complex... individual experiences, but as a project, mostly those are exceptions rather than the rule. And for me, running a central service, it's important to be able to kind of take the pattern and apply that over and over again without having to... I mean, there's little details that we have to do with individual people. But because we have about 170 people doing it, there's a flow of stuff of people who are up for it. And that's what is so wonderful about doing this project with these people.
So we have no more time for questions for you. So that was the alarm for the moment. Thank you very much, Melissa.